Mr. President, since its inception, Obamacare has remained consistent in one regard: an alarming pattern of delays, glitches, and overturned provisions, not to mention failure to meet certain promises that were made when this bill was passed. First, Congress repealed the law's 1099 mandate after realizing this provision would drastically increase expenses on every business, charity, and local government entity. Then Congress repealed the law's long-term care program in 2012 after the administration admitted this wouldn't work. Next came a slew of waivers. Rather than admit Obamacare would drive up costs, the administration created a program that has granted more than 1,700 waivers. 1,700 waivers covering more than 4.1 million people. A lot of other Americans are saying, hey, how about our waiver? Why did these 1.7 or 1,700 waivers covering 4.1 million people go to them, not to us? Even meeting its own deadlines for implementation seems to be too difficult for the White House. According to the Congressional Research Service, as of May 31st, 2013, the administration had yet to meet half, only 41 of 82, of the deadlines legally required by the Congress under this legislation. But in June 2013, President Obama claimed, and I quote, "I think it's important for us to recognize," he said, "and acknowledge this is working the way it's supposed to." Really? 1,700 waivers for people who couldn't comply with this? Repeals enacted by Congress, and it's working the way it's supposed to? Is that what they intended when they passed the bill? It's not what they promised. Just a month later, the President's team announced the delay of another key Obamacare component, the employer mandate, a one-year delay until 2015, while maintaining implementation of the individual mandate. So individuals, yes. Employers, no. We know you're not able to comply. The downside of complying with this under this timetable doesn't work. So we force individuals to comply with the law and the mandate to buy health insurance or pay a tax, but we take that burden away from employers. Is that fair? Is that fair that you give it to part of the country, give it to employers? How about the other half, the employees? How about the other half, the individuals who don't fall under those plans? And then yesterday, the nonpartisan Congressional Research Service released a report that revealed 19 instances in which portions of Obamacare have been changed, rescinded, repealed, or delayed. 19 separate times when it's either been changed, repealed, rescinded, or delayed. The report specifically found that the President has signed 14 laws, several of these with multiple provisions, that each amend, rescind, or repeal part of Obamacare. The administration also has delayed at least 5 significant provisions of the law. So what does all this tell us? It tells us that even the President and his administration recognize that the health care law that they wrote and they passed without one single vote of support from the opposing party, they recognize that this is not going as promised or planned. Recognizing the impact of his health care laws having on job creators, the President decided to give some relief to businesses, as I've said before. But don't all Americans deserve the same break? Don't we all deserve some relief? While it's a necessary step, even the delay of the employer mandate came too late for many Hoosiers, whose companies have been forced to drop employees or cut back their hours to less than 30 hours per week, the threshold at which Obamacare kicks in for companies. In recent weeks, newspapers across Indiana have been filled with stories of companies and school systems that have reduced hours to avoid the Obamacare requirements, and all this coming at a time of continued chronic high unemployment. People working 2 and 3 part-time jobs just to keep their heads above water, just to keep barely the bills paid, at a time when our economy is growing at half the rate that it should, when we're not putting people back to work and people are actually dropping out of the job search category, we add this burden on them. Let's take a moment and consider the contrast between these reports and the promises made by those who authored, those who have supported and voted for, and this administration which continues to say it's working just as planned. When President Obama signed his health care reform package into law back in March 2010, he said that the reforms would, quote, lower costs for families and for businesses and help lift a decades-long drag on our economy. Wow. A law that was supposed to help workers, employers, families, and our economy is instead doing the exact opposite. These sentiments that I've heard, the same sentiments over and over, and I continue to hear from Hoosiers as I travel across the state, this law is not helping. It is hurting. We need to repeal this law and replace it step by step with reforms that lower costs, increase access to care, and empower patients, not bureaucrats in Washington. Mr. President, I have voted more than 24 times to repeal, defund, and strip provisions from Obamacare. It's a principle I share with all my colleagues in the Republican side, and I will continue to support these efforts. Right now, however, I believe the best way to stave off this coming train wreck, as described by a Democrat senator who was instrumental in writing the bill, is that the best way to stave off this train wreck is to delay implementation of the Obamacare mandates for 1 year. The President has already determined that he's going to delay the employer mandate, so let's add to that the delay of the individual mandate, which essentially delays implementation of this law for a year, so that we have the opportunity to do what we need to do legislatively, and that is repeal this law and replace it with sensible legislation and rational and cost-effective legislation that actually addresses the problem that we're dealing with, but also gives the American people a chance to basically tell the White House, this ain't working. We need to make a difference here, and this can be an issue that the American people can debate throughout 2014 while it's delayed, and then put their concerns, express their concerns at the ballot box in November of 2014. As a consequence of this, I have introduced legislation, supported now by over 30 senators, which would delay the individual mandate until January 2015. I'm pleased that the Minority Leader, Senator McConnell, has agreed to take up this bill, to lead the effort, to join me in not only having this body examine this bill, debate it, and vote on it, but to join the House, which has already passed. My Indiana colleague in the House, Congressman Young, introduced this legislation in the House of Representatives, and it passed with bipartisan support. Even the President's own members in his own party have recognized this train wreck that's coming and have chosen in significant numbers to support the Republican effort of my colleague from Indiana, Congressman Young. And so I'm carrying this ball here in the United States Senate. I'm pleased that the Minority Leader, as I've said, Senator McConnell, is willing to take this up. And we already have the support of more than 30 senators, and I expect that that will grow, and hopefully it'll be a bipartisan support. The bill is identical to legislation that the Republicans passed in the House. I mentioned a fellow Hoosier, Congressman Todd Young, who has authored that bill, and I joined him with this. If Democrats, Republicans, and a majority of Americans agree this law is not working, then let's do something now, before Obamacare's full impact on our economy with this bill takes effect. I urge the Majority Leader to allow a vote on this amendment that will be offered and give all Americans the same protection this administration has provided to businesses, to give that to individual Americans, After all, it's just simply a matter of fairness. The administration, having decided to waive for a year the implementation of the employer mandate, needs to waive for a year the implementation of the individual mandate, in fairness to the American people. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.